An update on 4 major things that they have been doing since inception. 4 major things they've been doing since inception. I will be inviting or introducing the entire team, I think at the tail end of their presentation, because the minister is here himself with his supporting staff. But I would like to very quickly get us rolling by introducing the minister responsible for this ministry. He is the Member of Parliament for Swami.
Distinguished colleagues and members of the media fraternity, it gives me much joy to be here with us all today and to bring to you the Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs and to inform you about what we do, especially given the fact that at a point in time in the history of this country, after the creation of the ministry had to go into the belly of the whale like Jonah was, and suffered resurrection at the turn of Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo's regime, and we've been on course since then. Now, the Minister of Parliamentary Affairs exists to assist in the governance of this country, to ensure that the purpose of the Constitution, which provides that the country should give to ourselves a framework of governance that would ensure the rapid, equitable development of this country, is guaranteed. Now, the ministry exists to play its part in this governance architecture. The ministry facilitates, it coordinates, monitors, and evaluates strategies which will build consensus for the execution of government business in Parliament through the deployment of skilled human resources and modern technology to enhance the legislative process. It facilitates the development and implementation of citizen-centered, collaborative interface with other state and non-state actors on matters relating to the executive and the legislature. The ministry, in that regard, monitors, evaluates the implementation of government policies and then feeds it back to Cabinet and to Parliament with the aim of enhancing democratic governance. The ministry undertakes such research as may be necessary to enhance the collaboration between Parliament and executive and civil society groups. It enhances the interface between the executive and the legislature and increases the participation of civil society and public interest groups in the parliamentary process. It improves the relationship between members of Parliament and the MMDCEs. The Constitution, as you do know, provides for the equitable development of all parts of the country. And it relates in particular to equitable development in the districts and within the districts. The key players are the assemblies and the members of Parliament. And it's for that reason why it's important to ensure a healthy working relationship between the members of Parliament and the assemblies, in particular the MMDCEs. Now, the major achievements of the ministry since its recreation, I would want to discuss them under 4 broad themes. First is the engagement with the ministers, with the members of parliament and the MMDCEs. And in this regard, we compartmentalize the country into 4 zones: the southern sector, into 3 zones, I should say: the southern sector, the middle belt, and the northern belt. Then we had dialogue with the core and expanded leadership of Parliament. The third thing that we have undertaken is engaging civil society organizations and the media and stakeholders' engagement on monetization of politics in Ghana, and we involve the political parties and other national stakeholders in a broad-based consultation. On engagement with the between the MPs and the MMDCs, which we facilitated throughout the country, we did so under the mandate of deepening political and administrative decentralization through the harmonization of working relationship between members of parliament and metropolitan, municipal, and district chief executives. The ministry, in that regard, has organized leadership, good governance, and conflict management workshops for the MPs and the MMDC throughout the country. As I indicated, we have this in 3 different areas. The ministry organized the first leadership and good governance workshop for MPs and MMDCs from the southern belt. At the time, we had not had the creation of additional regions. So we had 9 regions at the time, and we had we broke them down into, we had 10, sorry, I should say. As I said yesterday, it's not attributable to cognitive dissonance. I just arrived, and I shouldn't be out of touch. Well, so we did so for the southern sector, and it involved Greater Accra, Eastern, Volta, and Central regions. And that forum held in Koforidua from the 8th of December to the 10th of December 2017. The guest speaker of this workshop was the Senior Minister, the Honorable Yao Osafo-Maafo. The areas that we covered, the forum covered, included the concept of decentralization and local government, the theory and practice of good governance, and the nature of relationship that ought to exist between MPs and MMDCs. As I said, Article 36, 2D of the Constitution provides for an even and balanced development of the country. And at the district level, at the constituency level, the active players are the assemblies and the members of parliament. Decentralization, as you do know, is covered by Chapter 20 of our Constitution, and it provides for a harmonious working relationship between the members of parliament and the assemblies. And for the practice of good governance, that indeed is the pith of our Constitution, which is encapsulated in the preamble of our Constitution, which requires us to ensure a very transparent and accountable governance. And again, the players in this are the members of parliament and, of course, the executive, of which the district assemblies are part of. We had a workshop on leadership and good governance for MPs and the MMDCs in the Middle Belt. The program on leadership and good governance was organized for the MPs and the MMDCEs in Ashanti, Western, and Brong Ahafo regions. The program held in Kumasi from the 3rd to the 5th of June 2018, and the keynote address at the opening ceremony was delivered by the Vice President, His Excellency Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia. The issues that were discussed related to the core tenets of leadership and good governance and the relationship between them, the state of implementation of the decentralization and local government policy thus far, that is since 1993 where we are, related to the challenges and the knots that had arisen which needed to be untied. Then we did an evaluation of the performance of the MPs and the MMDCs under the Fourth Republic with a view to identify performance gaps. We examined the perennial conflicts between the Members of Parliament and the MMDCs, which have tended to undermine the collective efforts at development. We related to real conflict case studies and highlighted the lessons for conflict resolution. The workshop on leadership and good governance for MPs and MMDCs also held in the Northern Belt, which involved the then Northern, Upper East, and Upper West regions. It held in Tamale, and it was under the theme Enhancing Leadership for Good Governance. The President of the Republic, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, delivered the keynote address. The program attracted a number of ministers, including in particular the Minister for Local Government and Rural Development and the Minister for the Interior. The following areas engaged the attention of the ministry during the workshop: a conceptual review of the nexus between leadership and good governance. The following essential ingredients of leadership and good governance featured: 1, the context of political leadership in Ghana, the core ingredients of effective leadership and the relationship between leadership and good governance were thoroughly discussed. The justification for leadership and good governance definitions, techniques, qualities, and functions of leadership were also treated. The general relevance of governance and leadership to the sustainable development of Ghana were matters that were also covered. The major issues that emerged from these workshops are the following: that there is a collaboration between the Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs and National Commission for Civic Education to intensify public education on the role of members of parliament and the MMDCs. Because, till date, there are many people who do not really appreciate the constitutionally defined functions for members of parliament and that of the district assemblies represented by the MMDCEs. The second thing that came to the fore was that political parties need to review their policies and the processes and procedures relating to the choice of parliamentary candidates to reduce the very high attrition rate of members of parliament. Noting that in the business of parliament, on the average, the longer a person stays in parliament, the greater the quality, or if you like, the value addition that he or she introduces or garners to improve democratic governance. The third matter that emerged was that in the appraisal of the MMDCs by the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development, their relationship with the MPs is measured as one of the criteria, since conflict, wherever it is, affects local development. Fourthly, that political parties have a role to play in dealing with conflicts between the MPs and the MMDCEs. Fifth, that the practice of the appointment of 30% of assembly members by government be deliberated upon much more seriously and possibly reviewed to reduce the political patronage that characterizes this process. The motive behind the appointment of 30% of membership of the Assembly is a laudable one, except that as we have traveled the path of our own democracy, the process has come, we must admit, to be very much abused, in the sense that whereas the Constitution envisaged populating the assemblies with people of expertise to positively affect governance at the local level, increasingly we are appointing whoever we believe is well positioned in a particular political party, and that may not necessarily inure to good governance. Sixthly, that the security of tenure of MMDCs must be ensured to promote increased productivity, because if the one is assured of his or her own security of tenure, he becomes better focused. These things we did before the present government came in with this introduction of the process to amend the Constitution to ensure that MMDCs are elected by universal adult suffrage, unlike what is done now, that is allowing the Assembly members to do the election. So we fed back our own outcomes to government, and I don't want to say that it is what we did which has occasioned this, because I know that the current government, as part of its manifesto, had already made this bold declaration. However, if these things also happen and feed into the process of taking a decision, one then is much more comfortable in knowing that we are on a sound track. Eighth point, that the necessary constitutional amendment be effected so that local government elections are conducted with the participation of political parties, and MMDC position is made elective by, as I've already said, universal adult suffrage. These outcomes were already, by the workshops that we conducted, they had come to the fore. As I said, we fed them to the appropriate authorities. Colleagues, the second matter that we have dealt with is the interaction with core leadership and expanded leadership of Parliament. The Ministry has engaged the core leadership and expanded leadership of Parliament on 6 different occasions. For the core leadership, the first interaction gave the Ministry the opportunity to communicate its vision, mission, and the mandate to the leadership of Parliament to seek their collaboration. It's important that we did that, because when the Ministry went comatose under the previous administration, no thanks again to the negative report from the African Peer Review Group, which posited that the Ministry existed to emasculate Parliament, even though they did not really appreciate what we were doing, what Ghana's Parliament, unique as it is, was doing with the creation or the existence of the Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs. We needed, in that respect, having suffered a second birth, to be open and transparent with the leadership of Parliament to, as it were, justify the existence of the Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs. Let's not forget that the Ministry existed at the very outset. It was introduced at the very outset of the Fourth Republic, that is in 1993 January. It was created by the government of the day under the leadership of Flight Lieutenant Rawlins. So it existed for 8 years and was continued in existence by President Kufuor's administration. So for 16 years it existed, but under President Mills, the Ministry suffered some premature retirement and was brought back by President Akufo-Addo. So the first interaction gave the ministry the opportunity to communicate its vision, as I've already said, mission and mandate to the leadership of Parliament and to seek their collaboration. The meeting brought together the entire core leadership of Parliament and the leadership of the Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs. The second seminar deliberated on the issues that affect the credibility of Parliament. The meeting brought together the core leadership of Parliament, the senior minister, representatives of civil society organizations, and members of the advisory board and management of the Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs. The theme was institutional credibility and democratic consolidation in Ghana, Parliament in focus. The objectives that guided the program included: 1, the examination of the relationship between the credibility of Parliament and democratic consolidation in Ghana. Because we should all recognize that Parliament is the bulwark of democracy anywhere at all. Whenever we have suffered coups in Ghana, of the 3 arms of government, let's not forget, it's only Parliament that is prescribed. The executive, however it's called, exists in one form or the other, whether it's a revolutionary government, whether it's a constitutional government, whether it's a redemptive government, or whether it's a liberationist government. All of them are the executive, which assume various characters and features. They remain the executive. The judiciary also remains. It's never prescribed. Even when we have some additions, like tribunals, they are still part of the judiciary establishment. But Parliament is the only institution that is prescribed. So we examined the relationship between the credibility of Parliament and democratic consolidation in Ghana, and reviewed Parliament's mandate in nurturing a credible institution as a prerequisite for the consolidation of democracy. Because wherever Parliament is not strong, democracy is incomplete. And indeed, democracy is dealt a mortal blow if Parliament is reduced in its power or in its operation. We examined the challenges confronting Parliament and parliamentarians, which affect the integrity of the institution and, indeed, the integrity of members of Parliament. The third core leadership engagement, the theme was an overview of the second session of the 7th Parliament of the 4th Republic, and it brought together the leadership of Parliament, members of the advisory board of the ministry, and representatives of civil society organizations. The focus of this engagement was the scrutiny of the 2018 session and strengths and weaknesses of Parliament. The meeting underscored the continued relevance of Parliament in a democracy, and from that meeting we had about 5 main issues coming up for further interrogation. 1, it enabled the participants to undertake an introspection of the performance of Parliament and help the ministry to seek the collaboration and support of the leadership of Parliament. It provided a platform for an assessment of the level of responsiveness of Parliament to the needs of the country. Thematic areas that guided the discussions included the nature of the relationship between the executive and the legislature, the overall performance of the legislature, the capacity of the committee system in Parliament, because, as you do know, it is said that any parliament anywhere is as strong as its committee systems make it. How is the performance of the committees in Parliament? How do we judge them? How strong are they? And how do they reinforce the capacity and the competence of our own Parliament? The performance of both the majority and minority caucuses in Parliament, are they living up to their responsibility? And indeed, the performance of our speakers, how neutral have they been? How allergic have they been to the concerns of their own parties? Which ultimately affects the performance of Parliament and indeed the quality of debate in the House. If you have a speaker who is overly allergic to his own partisan concerns, certainly it serves to emasculate debate in the House. And that then would not help Parliament grow. It renders Parliament as a timorous establishment, a rubber stamp kind of institution which only serves the purpose of the ruling administration. So the performance, the demonstrable competence and neutrality of the Speaker also matters in assessing Parliament. The fourth meeting with the core leadership interaction was under the theme Sustaining Ghana's Democracy, a review of the first meeting of the third session of the 7th Parliament of the Fourth Republic. The meeting largely achieved the following objectives. One, it reviewed the performances of Parliament and identified the major strengths and weaknesses of Parliament. It explored areas of further collaboration between the Ministry of Parliament, the Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs, and Parliament. And third, it discussed the urgency of developing a holistic framework for the assessment of Parliament and parliamentarians. We've seen many people and institutions come up with their own assessment of parliamentarians. Oftentimes, it doesn't serve the purpose. Because if you want to assess members of Parliament, you want to really relate to the functions of Parliament. What are the functions of members of Parliament? They perform representational function. How do you assess that function of Parliament or member of Parliament? What discourse that happens in Parliament, deliberation, the deliberative functions of members of Parliament? How do you assess a member, a typical member of Parliament, in the performance of this function in Parliament? By deliberation, we transmit information to the people of this country in order to position them to make informed choices when the time arrives for making of choices, especially during elections. So the discourse, deliberations in Parliament should be well researched and should be predicated on information that could be sacrosanct. How do members of Parliament attain this degree of perfection? How are they able to attain that? And how do you measure the performance of a member of Parliament in this? Arguably, the institution of Parliament has the function of oversight of the executive. Not only of the executive, other constitutional bodies, like the judiciary, like SHRAG, Media Commission, Electoral Commission, and so on, and so the many, many faults. How do you assess a member of Parliament? You do know, for instance, that when it comes to the business of legislation, crafting laws for this country, any of you who's been in Parliament would realize that on those occasions, we have very few members of Parliament in the House. And yet, arguably, it's the greatest function of Parliament and of parliamentarians. How many parliamentarians do you see there? Oftentimes, when it comes to making laws, we don't see more than 50 people in the House. And of the 50 that you may see, the business of crafting the legislation would rest on not more than, let me say, 20 people in the House, or the 275. What is the reason for this that we are seeing? So we had to go into all this. And if you want to really assess a member of Parliament, these are the necessary ingredients that you should use. the assessment tools that you use. And yet, we have one coming out to say that, well, I'm measuring the performance of Parliament by the attendance of members of Parliament. That's sole criterion. Certainly, it's good, though, because you are voted as a member of Parliament to be in Parliament, to participate in the business of Parliament. But you cannot say that that should be the only yardstick if you want to assess the performance of a member of Parliament. Parliament and parliamentarians exercise what is called the power of purse function, that is financial control over the executive, which really is done best at the time of delivering budget. You have to analyze the budget to see whether or not allocations are made to be congruent with government's own policies and programs and projects, which would ensure a balanced and equitable development of this country. How do we interrogate the issues? How do members of Parliament interrogate these issues? When you have allocated resources, you need to follow up to see whether the allocations have been applied as the government sought to do at the time of the presentation of the budget. That is oversight. In assessing members of Parliament, all these should be part of the assessment tools. And yet, it's not like that at all. A credible institution as the University of Ghana, for instance, the last one that they did, it was, predicated on perception of people, of the performance of members of Parliament. Almost invariably, they dwell so much about whether or not a member of Parliament has facilitated development projects in his constituency. And certainly, that cannot be the best. So it means that even a credible institution as the University of Ghana is, they even got it wrong at the very outset. So how do we collaborate with the institution of Parliament to get this properly sorted out? Recommendations were proffered, and these recommendations have been fed to the appropriate institution, Parliament in the first place, and also the institutions that will want to partner Parliament in assessing Parliament. Because if we get it wrong, like in my view, the university got it wrong, it goes to undermine the credibility of Parliament as an institution. And indeed, it downwarps the experiment that we are pursuing, that is democratic governance. It dilutes from that and makes it appear as if it is not important what the members of Parliament are required to do. The workshop with the expanded leadership of Parliament also engaged the expanded leadership on two separate occasions. I've already related to what we did with the core leadership, and now we have had to with the expanded leadership. The first of the meetings brought together the first and second deputy speakers, the majority and minority leadership, the chairpersons, ranking members, and the deputies of all the select and some standing committees of Parliament. The Chief of Staff delivered the keynote address at that forum. That's the first one that we did. And the major objectives that we interrogated or set for ourselves was that there was a need to enhance the interface between the executive and the legislature. The executive is elected on the platform that they offer the electorate, that is encapsulated in their manifestos, and then what expression that the directive principles of state policy give us, the overall architecture of national development, and what if we really had a functioning National Development Planning Commission, what reports that it would have given us. The President is also required under the directive principles of state policy to come out with his own coordinated social and economic development policy for this country. So you are measuring government's performance against all these. And don't forget, even the budget that a government will come to read in Parliament via the Minister for Finance also contains the economic policy of government. So you want to measure a government on these bases. That is the constitutional imperatives, what government itself has come out, their own report, economic and social development policy, the budget, the framework that the budget offers, and the manifesto of the government itself. So government is elected to ensure that its own development programs are followed through. But in doing that, they need Parliament. And we require that collaboration. You don't come to Parliament and ride roughshod over Parliament. And that is why we need this, occasionally we need this dialogue with the leadership of Parliament in order to be able to sell your ideas to. And if the opposition parties have any critique of your own programs or policies, it will feed back to government so that government improves its own roadmap to developing the country. So the major objectives was the need to enhance the interface between the executive and the legislature, the need to strike a synergy between two of the most critical institutions of governance, that is Parliament and Executive, for the development of the country. And the program sought to strengthen the relationship between the Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs and Parliament, and also afforded the members of Parliament the opportunity to re-examine the tools needed to strengthen the oversight functions of Parliament. The second expanded leadership seminar came under the theme interrogating the performance of Ghana's Parliament under the Fourth Republic. And that forum discussed the performance of Parliament since the inception of the Fourth Republic. The thematic areas that were covered included: one, the identification of the major strengths and weaknesses of the committee systems in Parliament, the research capacity and other resources available to the committees of Parliament, the attrition rate and its effect on the performance of Parliament, and Parliament and the sustainability of democratic governance in Ghana, major constraints of Parliament in the performance of their constitutionally mandated functions, and the recommendations to improve upon the performance of Parliament and indeed of parliamentarians. Then we also engaged civil society organizations and the media. The ministry's program involving civil society and the media were aimed at promoting their participation in the policy making and implementation process, because a government represents the people, and the ideas of the people matter in formulating a policy of government. I told you that I've been away for some time, but yesterday in the afternoon when I returned back to base, from the airport I had to rush from the airport to chair a cabinet committee meeting. On my way from the airport to the meeting, I was listening to some radio discussions, and I heard many voices on a program that allegedly is going to be unveiled by the Ministry of Education. People were talking about it, all manner of people making their own contributions, informed and uninformed. But it's good for the system. You sieve and take what is good for the country. So that is how policies are supposed to be affected by the general populace. And the ministry exists to provide this platform for sharing ideas. And that is why we occasionally have these interactions with civil society organizations and the media. The meeting, as I said, helped the members of parliament and civil society organizations to interface in discussing issues of national importance. And the last one, which we did at the time, the government was about introducing the Vigilantism and Related Offences Bill. So we used the opportunity to tickle civil society organizations in order for them to make their own ideas known to us, to the ministry. And at the time, we had also just finished dealing with the right to information law, and the media in particular wanted to know how it was going to be implemented into next year, January, when after the passage of the Appropriations Act by Parliament this year, what the implementation would look like. And we dialogued on that one as well with the media. We had an engagement with civil society on the contribution of Parliament to democratic development under the Fourth Republic. Civil society organizations everywhere, as we do know, are raising issues to enhance good governance, especially in matters relating to accountability and transparency, corruption, policy slippages, and the relational balance or imbalance of power between the executive and the legislature. The participation of civil society organizations in policy formulation process is necessary, as I've already indicated, to enrich the content of policies and programs and promote public ownership of same. Because if you're a government and you want to introduce any policy or program and you don't have a buy-in from the populace, certainly implementing that program or project will be dealt a mortal wound at the very outset, which is why it's important to factor in the concerns of the populace in making these programs and policies. Then we had the dialogue with civil society under the theme, interrogating Parliament's contribution to the consolidation of Ghana's democracy thus far, the perspectives of civil society organization. Participants critically examined the performance of Parliament since 1993 and offered suggestions on what could be done normatively to reposition Parliament to deliver on its core mandate. Sub-themes treated included the institutional framework of Parliament and its effect on the performance of its functions, the nature, strengths, and weaknesses of the committee system, and the Speaker as an independent umpire. The ministry discussed the implementation of the right to information law, discussions with civil society organizations with special interests in the law were candid and frank. The ministry considered the interactions with civil society organizations on the RTI law as timely, and these constitute important stakeholders in the implementation process. The program succeeded in examining the institutional mechanisms for the implementation of the RTI law and discussed the challenges and prospects of the implementation of the RTI law, and examined the contributions civil society organizations could make towards the successful implementation of the RTI. It offered recommendations to support the establishment of the RTI Commission and the need to build an RTI law coalition, all to ensure the proper implementation of this law, which is supposed to be the icing on the cake in our march towards expanding space of democratic governance, and also in particular to help us in the battle against corruption. The ministry collaborated with Parliamentary Network Africa, the Parliament of Ghana, and the Center for Democratic Development, CDD. The ministry partnered PN Africa, CDD, and Parliament to undertake a review of the first meeting of the third session of the 7th Parliament of the Fourth Republic. The dissemination of the findings were done on the 27th of June 2019 at the Justice D.F. Annan Auditorium in Parliament. The program was under the theme Preventing High Attrition Rate in Parliament, the Need for Stakeholder Engagement. Parliament is as strong as its members make it. The current attrition rate of about 56%, the current Parliament has about 56% of membership who are first-timers. That certainly is too high. And indeed, if we must be candid with ourselves, very dangerous for the development of Parliament as an institution. Because if we have building the capacity of members of Parliament is not a 1-year matter. It's not a 2-year matter. It's not even a 1-term or 2-term matter. Oftentimes when we have had orientation courses for members of Parliament, even 2-term, 3-term members of Parliament will ask you questions that you think are very fundamental that maybe only first-timers will be asking. But third-term members of Parliament will be asking those questions. What it should suggest to you that the building the capacity of members of Parliament is not a one-stop affair. It is continuous, it is continual. And to the extent that we recognize the continuity of the process, you need to keep them there, to let them know and learn the rules of engagement, the rules of the functionality of Parliament and members of Parliament, so that we upscale our democratic governance. So these are matters that we're related to. And the meeting brought together the leadership of Parliament, civil society organizations, and other democracy-enhancing institutions, including in particular the NCCE, in whom we have found a worthy partner. We engaged the media, as I've already told you, and recognizably, a pluralistic media offers valuable channels for participation in the formulation and implementation of public policies and programs. The media's engagement sheds light on critical areas of national importance. It also provides citizens with the requisite opportunities to influence their own situations and change their circumstances for the better. And that's why, in due time, the engagement with the media is very, very relevant. The ministry had a media soiree to explain its mandate at the very outset and establish a working relationship with the media. The ministry, in collaboration with the Parliamentary Training Institute and the Parliamentary Network Africa, organized a training program for media practitioners on the role of the Minister of Parliamentary Affairs and his relationship with Parliament. A second interaction with the media was an opportunity to interrogate the workings of Parliament since 1993. The presence of the leadership of Parliament at the forum provided journalists the opportunity to ask very critical questions of the leadership of Parliament. The generally candid and dispassionate tone that governed the discussions gave ample indications of the democratic maturation of the participants. The platform was unique as it succeeded in deepening participatory democracy. The ministry also had a dialogue with senior media practitioners on the menace of political vigilantism in the country. That was before the passage of the bill. The ministry's dialogue with the media sought to elicit their own support in curbing political vigilantism in Ghana. The dialogue discussed, among others, the concept of vigilantism and its history in Ghanaian politics, identify the causes, consequences, and sources of funding of vigilante activities in the country, and assessed the adequacy or otherwise of the existing and proposed legal frameworks to address the menace, including the Vigilantism and Related Offences Bill 2019, which you do know has ultimately been passed by Parliament. It also examined the nature of political support from both government and opposition political parties in addressing the menace of vigilantism. The meeting that we had further identified the various contributions and interventions the media could make to address the menace of vigilantism. The ministry also had a stakeholders engagement on monetization of politics in Ghana. Political parties and national stakeholders consultation we had. The ministry engaged the primary stakeholders to address this potentially democracy derailing phenomenon. The program was organized on Thursday, the 30th of May 2019, with 4 political parties who have consistently performed creditably in presidential and parliamentary elections since the inception of the Fourth Republic. The level of monetization of elections and politics in Ghana, we must all admit, is unsustainable. The meeting discussed, among other things, 1, the inadequacies of the existing modes of conducting primaries by the political parties. Because let's face it, there's nowhere in the established democracies where, at the end of a tenure of one parliament, the process of choosing parliamentary candidates is reduced to an all-comers game, which people from within the country and from without the country descend on constituencies and say to the electorate, we are ready to remove the incumbent member of parliament and introduce ourselves. And when you ask some of them, oh, there's no development, oftentimes that's the refrain, there's no development in the constituency. I want to be there, the representative of the constituents, and to ensure democracy, to ensure development. I remember one lady that I encountered some time ago said to us that, her constituency is a poor constituency. The parents could not afford to buy school uniforms for them. So if she was elected, the member of parliament, she was going to supply school uniforms to all the primary school children in her constituency. Is that the function of a member of parliament? And yet, she was so passionate about that. So going forward, I believe that we need to come together to really provide the roadmap to ensuring that as a country and as political parties, we conduct primaries that would select appropriate persons to represent the constituencies and represent the institution of parliament, and then be able to perform the functions so defined by the Constitution as the functions of members of parliament. The meeting also reviewed the various strategies to strengthen internal party democracy. There's no democracy anywhere in the world. I'm talking about internal democracy of the political parties that is not guided and guarded in a way. There's nowhere in the world. And yet, in Ghana, I think the political parties want to demonstrate to all of us that they are more Catholic than the Pope. The meeting discussed and indeed examined the causes and consequences of monetization of politics in Ghana. Because if where we are going if care is not taken, Parliament may be populated in the foreseeable future by people with fat wallets and people with lean purses who may be very credible, very intellectual, and who may be able to serve the cause of this country, may be relegated to footnotes, and money bags will take over our democracy. Wherever the monies will be coming from, nobody can tell. But you and I can only conjecture. The meeting provided some concrete recommendations to curb the monetization of politics. Finally, we had a national stakeholders consultation on monetization of politics. And we had a stakeholders dialogue to interrogate the monetization of politics with a view to implementing mutually agreed procedures. This engagement was sequel to the Thursday, May 30th program with the 4 political parties who have consistently done well since the Fourth Republic. The growing trend of monetization in the country's electoral process has reached alarming proportions, we must all admit. It has reached the level of a national crisis. Distinguished colleagues, if we have a system which is dominated by monocracy, I keep telling people that nobody is into politics as a father, or if you like, a Mother Christmas. Right? Politics is not a matter of religion or faith, where congregation, when the pastor calls for the donation of or for collection, we say to them that politics is not like that. The politician sows today, he wants to reap tomorrow. These days, we are talking about curbing corruption, or at least the perception of it in the system. How do we deal with it when we know that the process of electing politicians, members of parliament, to represent us is so much predicated on money tricks, and yet we pretend that nothing is happening? We can't, I submit, that we can't deal with corruption if we don't confront this reality. Because, to restate, nobody is into politics who is a Father Christmas. We had a national stakeholders consultation, I've told you. The engagement was guided by the following objectives: to discuss the inadequacies of the existing modes of conducting primaries by the political parties and develop a strategy to strengthen internal party democracy, and examine the causes and consequences of monetization in parliament, in politics in Ghana, and provide concrete recommendations to curb the monetization of politics. You see, if you look at the Constitution, I think it's Article 58.9. It's Article 58.9 of the Constitution, which, with respect, let me see. Article 58.9, right? It provides I'm lost too. It's 55. Article 55.9. It provides, and I quote, "The members of the National Executive Committee of a political party shall be chosen from all the regions of Ghana." That's Article 55.9. So, in choosing the national executive of political parties, we are required to conform to Article 55(9) of the Constitution to ensure that the national executive of every political party has representatives from all the regions of this country. By these elections that we do, how are we able to satisfy this constitutional imperative? We're not able to do that. And in any event, the construct of this provision, which is very instructive, the operative word is not elected. It says, shall be chosen. Of course, election is part of the means of choosing, but acclamation is part of the means of choosing. Right? So that's why I'm saying to us that democracy is guided and guarded. And who says that by this resort we are not being democratic? The chairperson of the Conservative Party has been chosen by the current Prime Minister. Right? The chairperson of the Republican Party was appointed to that office by Donald Trump 3 days after he himself was elected. Equally so, the chairperson of the Democratic Party. That is how chairpersons are chosen everywhere in the established democracy. In Ghana, a person vying for the chairpersonship, the chairship of a party, will have to traverse the entirety of this country. And you think that person is a Father Christmas? He moves from Zuarungu to Elubo, from Aflao to Kore, to Boga, to Sankasi. And when he's not going alone. He has his own team. He has about 3-4 vehicles. They go stay in hotels to sell his candidacy to the party faithfuls. If you do the calculation on this exercise, the person spends billions of Ghana cedis. You think it's a Father Christmas? Colleagues, fellow citizens, let's wake up to the reality of our times. We are promoting corruption. The NDC is guilty, the NPP is guilty, all the political parties are guilty. I remember when we held our own National Delegates Conference at Kofodia, the British MP who came there, relating to what we were doing, he said to us that we are spending too much time and resources looking inwards when you should be spending much more time thinking through policies and programs to develop your country. How did we react? Going forward, how is the NPP going to reposition itself? How is the NDC going to reposition itself? The PPP, PNC, CPP. Let's relate to Article 55(9) of the Constitution. And if, by extrapolation, we do so in the process of choosing our own parliamentary candidates, we would not have offended the Constitution in any manner. So the forum, as I said, we brought together democracy-enhancing civil society organizations, student leaders, traditional rulers, the National Peace Council, independent governance institutions, including NCC, the Electoral Commission, the security agencies, former members of parliament, former ministers, the media, and other stakeholders in Ghana's democratic development. We brought also the political parties, the leadership of the political parties, our development partners, members of the diplomatic corps, and the academia. We wanted to dialogue on these main matters. And I think the outcomes were really, really commendable because people rose up and addressed these issues frontally. That we have been on this journey for quite a while. We must do serious introspection to positively affect our democratic governance. The Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs, by way of conclusion, is positioned to support Ghana's democratic transformation by, among other things, supporting the deepening of democratic governance, to assisting the enhancement of political and administrative decentralization through the harmonization of relationship between MPs and the MMDCEs, and ensuring the harmonization of relationship between Parliament and the Executive, for facilitating the demystification of the perception of executive dominance, 5, promoting the general consensus around the fundamental issues of national development, and 5, encouraging the participation of civil society organizations and the media in the shaping of public policies in order to secure for ourselves and posterity the blessings of liberty, equality of opportunity, and prosperity as captured in the preamble of the 1992 Republican Constitution. Ladies and gentlemen, I've spoken to the remit of the Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs, and if you allow me, I'll bring the curtain down on this and allow for questions and answers. Thank you very much.